One of the homework problems asks you to run a vector autoregression to test whether money has real effects, which is a huge question in macroeconomics. So let me show you how to do that. Just the kind of basics. So I'm going to download the data into um, Excel and then use Eviews. So Eviews is available in the computer labs, or you can sometimes, I don't know what the current status on this, but sometimes there's a student version that you can download that has basic functionality. So we get our data from the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis, which is easy to find. You just type Fred into the command line to search. And this, I guess I'll show you the home page here. So this is what it looks like. And if sometimes it has the things you want just right here. Otherwise, you can go through look through all these listings here. So we're just going to test to see if there's a connection between money supply and GDP. And the advantage you'll see of using a vector autoregression is it allows for some dynamics. On our graphs, it just looks like there is no time on the graphs. You know, something happens and everything's immediately affected. But as Milton Friedman once famously said, monetary policy has long and variable effects. So we want to take the timing into account. Monetary data, let's see, M2, and let's do monthly seasonally adjusted. And there we go. So money supply, trends up, with the economy. Although you can see right around 2009, there was a big jump up when we responded to the Great Recession, and more recently, an even more dramatic jump. It's I think it's probably a little more enlightening to show this in logs. So let's do that. So here's our graph in logs, which helps to scale things a little more appropriately because everything's, since all the numbers are bigger recently, then all the changes are bigger recently. So you still see this is kind of the biggest jump, but I guess the changes around here are a little more apparent. But we're going to be looking at growth rates anyway. So let me show you that quickly. Okay, so there's our growth rates. And again, there's the big jump up in money supply growth. It's a little bit harder to tell there's a jump here during the Great Recession, possibly due to the Fed response. But remember, M2 is a very broad category of money, so this isn't something that the Fed controls directly. That has indirect influence at best. Okay, well, let's download this Excel data. And just by the way, if we want to study the effect of monetary policy, that might be a reason to include to look at M1, or a more restrictive version of money that the Fed probably has closer control over. Okay, anyway, so we download the data in Excel, and let's get rid of all this stuff. Oops. So let's get rid of this stuff on top here. And let's just call this M2. And now the thing to do, let's select this whole column, copy this. We have to remember this date, so 1960 01. And now let's open up Eviews here. And the easy way to get data into Eviews, just right click and you get this paste as new work file. So M2. And now we have to tell it that this is dated with regular frequency, and this is monthly data, and the start date is 1960M01. That. Okay, and there's our data here. Okay, so we got M2 data. Now we need GDP data. So let's tell you what. Let's just go back to the Fred's homepage here because I'm sure we've got real GDP is ready to go here, and we all know what that looks like. So let's download this. Okay. RGP. Let's remember this is Q1 1947. So we are going to copy this, go back to Eviews, and as a new work file. Um, regular frequency. This is quarterly 1947 Q01. We need to name the existing work file. That's called that M. So this is, but this is really the one we want. We want to put these together. Now the problem is that we've got, this is monthly data, the money supplies in monthly data, and GDPs in quarterly data. So fortunately, Eviews is really handy with this. So all I have to do is take the M2 data and drag it over to the work file with real GDP, and that'll convert the monthly to quarterly data. Okay, so let's make sure, let's just take a quick look, see, make sure everything looks okay. There's M2, and, oh, that's M2 growth, isn't it? They didn't used to do that. Um, well, let's see. That's okay. That's actually what we want to use. So I'm going to just rename this. They used to always download the level, but I guess they've changed that now. So let's call this M2G for growth. Now, real GDP, I'm pretty sure this is the level. Yep. Okay, so that looks good, but that also means we need to convert. We want we want to use the growth rate for both. So I need to create a growth rate for real GDP. So the way I do that is say generate a new variable. So RGDPG equals times log RGDP minus RGDP minus 4. Okay, so when I do that RGDP, the minus 4, that means the fourth lag. So this is the, oop, I forgot the log here, didn't I? So this is the log difference over a full year, over 4 quarters. And we'll multiply that by 100, so we get a percentage, which is, I think, what we got for M2 growth. And let's see if that turned out okay. Okay, yeah, that looks familiar. Now, the reason we're doing that is we want to run a VAR with stationary data, which means loosely means that there's no trends, that you can meaningfully take an average. It is possible to do. There is some ways to test causality with variables that do have trends, but I think that's a topic we don't even get to in 439. So, working with stationary data definitely simplifies things. Um, okay, so I want to run a VAR testing um, uh, for the connection between M2 and real GDP. All right, so how do we do that? All right, very handy here, estimated VAR. And so this is really handy. We'll just do RGDPG and M2G. So we're interested in whether the money supply affects real GDP. We're actually interested in both, but that's our primary, that's our prior is that there's um, that the money supply possibly affects real GDP. Now, lag intervals, so we've got quarterly data, so it's nice to use kind of a good place to start is for lags. Um, and let's just let it rip. Okay, so here's what a vector autoregression is when you estimate it. It's we're actually estimating two equations. And one equation has real GDP on the left-hand side as the dependent variable, and then lags of real GDP and lags of money supply growth if we go down. So that's one equation. Another equation has M2 growth on the left-hand side, and then all those same lags on the right-hand side. Now that's kind of this gives us a bunch of numbers, a bunch of estimates. This is kind of hard to do anything with. But where vector autoregressions really come into their own is first of all with impulse response functions. So what this does is these are graphs. I think the impulse definition. Yeah, we'll start with this one. And this says, well, I'll just show you what this means. So these are our impulse response graphs. And what this says is, well, if there's a shock to the GDP equation, how does that, according to our estimate, how does that affect actual GDP over these next few quarters? So the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If there's a shock in period 1, what happens in that period, and then the next period, then the next period, then the next period. So we're estimating with all these dynamics. So now this one says, how does real GDP respond to M2? So this is much more interesting. How does GDP respond to itself? Well, there's persistence in GDP, so it's not surprising that there's some response here. So the blue line is the actual impulse response function, and the dotted lines, the orange dotted lines, are the confidence interval. So when you see the confidence interval that's completely above 0, that means, so let's say at the 4th lag here, there is a positive response. So M2 growth has a positive effect on real GDP growth. Now, that actually makes sense from our kind of short-term analysis, that M2 shifts aggregate demand and all that. The tricky part is that here's the response of M2 to real GDP growth, and actually higher real GDP growth seems to have a negative effect on M2 growth. So that is interesting. You might want to think about why that would be. I won't get into that right here, but there's some reasons why that could definitely happen. All right. So I think this is for any assignments. I think it's sufficient for you to paste these impulse responses in as your results. Just I'll show you one other. So this is where, if you want to get farther into this, this helps determine what the right number of lags is. So this is really for something that we'll talk about maybe later in the class, but probably more in 439. But this Granger causality, this is a formal test for whether this is actually happening. So if the dependent variable is real GDP growth, this tests whether essentially all the coefficients, whether are in the real GDP equation are 0. And so we can reject that at a p-value of 0.02, which is pretty good. So it definitely looks like M2 growth, there's statistically significant what we call Granger causality of real GDP growth. Not so much the other way around. Here, even though the impulse response functions looked like there was a genuine response, the causality test says that's not statistically significant. So that's interesting. All right. Okay, so for the assignments, I'd recommend that you graph. You can either do it directly. I think this will give you if you just go to the endogenous graph, you'll get the graphs of the two variables. or you can just do that directly from Quick Graph. Um, if you're interested, here's the actual equations that have been estimated here. A couple different versions of that. So I encourage you to look around through this. If you're not familiar with Eviews and vector autoregressions, then this is a good time to kind of flip around. As far as the homework problems go, like I said, the impulse responses and your interpretation of them is the most important part of that.